I was halfway across the lake when the motor just died. No warning, no sputter, just silence. My daughter looked up at me and said, dead serious, "Are we gonna have to swim home?" And that's when I realized someone had messed with my boat. Yeah, I didn't always live on an island. Actually, if you told me 5 years ago that I'd be paddling through the middle of a lake just to get home, I'd have laughed and gone back to microwaving a frozen burrito in my one-bedroom apartment, still trying to sign divorce papers that neither of us wanted to touch. But here I am. The island came into my life at the exact moment everything else was falling apart. The marriage, the job, the apartment, even my sanity a little bit. One night, I ended up on Zillow, half drunk, just scrolling through wrecks I couldn't afford and didn't want anyway. But then I saw it, this tiny blotch of land, not even labeled properly, just said private island, as is. Clicked on it, saw 5 awful pictures and a price that felt like a typo. Didn't even have a house, just the bones of one. Rotting pier, gutted walls, a half-finished dock. But it had something nothing else had, space and silence, and the kind of distance I didn't realize I craved until I was staring at it. So I bought it. Didn't tell anyone for a while. I drove down to the edge of Wren Lake and paid some guy $200 to ferry me out there. First thing I noticed was the smell, wet pine, like the whole place was sweating sap and fog. Second thing, there was nothing. Just trees, old boards, and the sound of birds that didn't give a damn about divorce lawyers or unpaid car insurance. I spent a full year rebuilding it on weekends. I'd haul out lumber and supplies in a rusty pontoon I got off Craigslist, cut boards on the island with a generator I fixed up, slept in a tent when I had to. By the time the walls were sealed, I had calluses on top of calluses and a back that hated me, but it felt like mine in a way nothing else ever had. When my daughter Lily came out the first time, she just stood on the dock and whispered, "Whoa," that's all she said. Then she pulled out a notebook and wrote something down. I asked her what it was, and she told me, "I'm naming it. This is Castle Dad." And that was it. That name stuck. She even drew a little sign and nailed it to a tree by the path. Still there. Thing is, the island itself wasn't part of any HOA. Technically, it wasn't even under the same jurisdiction. But the shoreline, where I kept my car parked, where I launched the boat every single day, that was HOA territory. Wren Shores, nice houses, fake smiles, and quarterly meetings about what shade of beige was neighborhood compliant. At first, nobody cared about me. I was just the weird island guy. I didn't park in front of anyone's house. I wasn't hosting loud parties. I even bought a parking permit at the little general store just off the main lot so I wouldn't take anyone's precious visitor spots. And it worked. For years. I kept my head down, waved when I had to, and lived my life between the trees and the water. I'd wake up to the sound of herons, brew coffee over a propane stove, and then motor across the lake to run errands or drop Lily off with her mom. That boat ride, it became my ritual. 10, maybe 15 minutes of water, sun, and quiet. Just me, the engine, and whatever junky podcast I was listening to that week. Even when it rained, I didn't mind. The boat had a little canvas canopy that I'd rigged up from a camping tarp and some old sail poles. It wasn't fancy, but it kept me dry. That was home. That was peace. Until Remington showed up. Of course, I didn't know his name at first, just that there was suddenly a guy who parked right next to the boat launch in a spotless black Lexus and stared too long at everything. One of those guys with perfect posture and teeth that look like they've never chewed anything tougher than steamed carrots. The first time I waved, he didn't wave back. Just gave me that half smile people wear when they think you work for them. I remember thinking, yep, this guy's gonna be a problem. So the very first thing that made me realize this guy wasn't just some uptight new neighbor, but a full-on problem. It was a note on my windshield. Plain white envelope. No return address, no name, just to the boat owner. Scribbled like some passive-aggressive ransom letter. Inside, a printed notice with a Wren Shores HOA letterhead and a lot of bolded text about unauthorized access to HOA property and something called a shoreline usage fee. Yeah, a fee to use the lake. It said I needed to register my vessel with the HOA and pay a monthly access assessment of $450, effective immediately, and if I didn't comply, I'd be subject to removal of access privileges. I remember rereading that line 3 times like it was written in code. Removal of access? What does that even mean? It's a lake, a public one. You can't just gate water. I laughed at first. I really did, out loud, like someone had left a prank on my car. I figured, okay, maybe they're getting all HOA zealous about the dock or the little stretch of shoreline where I park. Maybe it's some kind of mistake and someone doesn't realize I'm not part of the association. Happens. Bureaucracies love making things up and calling them rules. So I did the rational thing. I walked up to the HOA office, which is actually just a repurposed model home they use for meetings and mail pickups. Walked in, said hi to the lady at the desk, and asked, very politely mind you, what the hell this new access assessment was about. She smiled like a receptionist at a funeral home, all lips, no teeth. Oh, that's from Mr. Remington. He just started as our new director. He's making sure the shoreline is protected for dues-paying residents only. I told her again that I'm not a resident. I don't live in Wren Shores. My property's not even on their map. I just used the boat launch, same as always. She leaned in a little and said, still smiling, well, the shoreline is HOA maintained, and that includes access to the water. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't a mistake. It was the opening move. A soft one, meant to look like paperwork. Like maybe I'd just go, ah, crap, guess I better pay the fee, and that'd be the end of it. But no way. That lake is a public body of water. It's registered with the state. It's used by fishermen, kayakers, and weekend drunks on inflatable unicorns. And this guy thinks he can charge rent to touch it? I walked out of there with the kind of fake calm you get right before your brain starts flipping tables. Didn't even say anything. Just nodded, folded the paper, and left. Back at the dock, I stood there staring at the boat, that little aluminum skiff with the patched-up canopy and the chipped paint I'd fixed up myself. It looked so innocent, just bobbing there like it didn't know it had become the subject of some HOA land grab, and I knew right then this wasn't going to be a one-time thing. He was testing me, seeing if I'd fold easy, and buddy, I may live on a floating lawnmower motor, but I don't fold for bullies in khakis. At first, I figured if I ignored them long enough, they'd get bored and move on to something more important, like someone's mailbox being a quarter-inch too crooked or a teenager parking slightly over the painted line. You know, typical HOA power trip stuff. But Remington? He wasn't typical. I kept using the dock like I always had, parked in the same spot by the store, launched from the same patch of shoreline, waved to the same sleepy fisherman who always nodded back and never said a word. Business as usual. Except now I started noticing little things. Tiny little shifts like the air had gotten heavier. One morning I got to my boat and the tarp was gone. Just gone. The canopy I'd rigged myself from a beat-up tent and some aluminum poles vanished like it had never been there. At first I thought maybe the wind took it, but there was no wind the night before. No rips, no torn shreds floating around. Just clean cuts where the ties had been, like someone sliced the cords and lifted it off like a magician's tablecloth. I asked the store owner, Joanne, if she'd seen anything. She gave me this long look, the kind people give when they want to say something but are afraid it's going to come back and bite them. She finally said, they were out here. Him and those two guys in polo shirts, standing around your boat, didn't touch it while I watched, but they waited till I went inside to load the delivery. When I came back out, they were gone. No proof, no video, no witnesses willing to say more than half a sentence. I patched up a new tarp and told myself, okay, that's one shot across the bow. Let's just keep it moving. Then came the ticket. Yeah, a literal parking ticket. On my truck. Right there by the general store where I'd had a paid permit for years. Little yellow slip tucked under my wiper claiming I was in violation of Wren Shore's Private Parking Ordinance 12B. I took it inside to Joanne and she just rolled her eyes so hard I thought she'd sprain something. They can't enforce that here, she said. This is my lot. You pay me, not them. I believed her, but it didn't stop the second ticket. Or the third. I started collecting them like bad coupons. Each one came with a new threat. Your vehicle may be towed. You are not in compliance. Further violations will result in legal action. Legal action. For parking where I've always parked. For launching a boat into a public lake. For living too quietly on a piece of land Remington can't control. Then came the boat inspection. And when I say inspection, I mean two guys in reflective vests poking around my motor like they had any clue what they were looking at. No ID, no paperwork, just a clipboard and an attitude. Said they were doing a routine environmental check on behalf of the HOA. I asked them who authorized it. They just said, the board. I told them to back off or I was calling the sheriff. They did, but not before one of them muttered something like, not worth it, he'll fold soon enough. I didn't fold. Instead, I bought a trail cam and zip-tied it under the dock. If they were going to mess with my stuff, I wanted eyes on it. I didn't tell anyone, didn't post online, didn't make threats. I just set the trap and waited. And I'm glad I did, because a few days later, I came down to the boat and noticed the gas cap was off. Not just loose, fully unscrewed and hanging by the tether. The boat started up fine that morning, but halfway across the lake, she coughed, sputtered, then died. And that's when I had Lily with me. She had her backpack on, hair still damp from the shower, earbuds in, and she looked up at me and said, "Why are we stopping?" I tried the starter again. Nothing. Just a whine and a click. Checked the tank. Still had fuel. Smelled weird though. Sharp, bitter, not quite right. That's when my stomach sank. Someone put something in it. Something wrong. I didn't want to scare her, so I played it calm. Said we'd just drift for a bit and I'd get the oars. Oars. Jesus. I hadn't used those damn things in over a year. They were stuck under the bench, dusty and splintered. But they worked. Sort of. I paddled us the rest of the way back to the island in silence, sweat running down my back, arms shaking halfway through. Lily sat still the whole ride, like she could feel the tension in the air and didn't want to poke it. That night, she curled up on the couch and asked if we were in trouble. I told her no, that it was just grown-up drama, but I didn't sleep. Not a minute. I laid there staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of water slapping against the pier, knowing someone had decided to turn this into a war. Not just politics, not just policy. Sabotage. That's when I knew I wasn't imagining things. They didn't want me to pay a fee. They wanted me gone. I gave them every chance to be reasonable. I swear I did. I started with the sheriff's office, figured it was the most neutral way to go. No lawyers, no drama, just a straight-up conversation with someone who didn't have a stake in the HOA's little fiefdom. I explained everything, from the sudden shoreline access fee to the boat being tampered with. Gave them the ticket stubs, the printout from the fake inspection, even showed them photos of the sliced canopy. The deputy I talked to, Collins, I think, listened politely the whole time, but I could see it in his eyes. That checked-out look people get when they've already decided nothing's going to come of this. When I finished, he rubbed his chin and said, "Well, that's mostly a civil matter. If you catch someone in the act, call us, and we'll come out. But if it's HOA policy stuff, that's not really in our lane." I asked if sabotage was in their lane. He hesitated, then asked if I had any proof. Video? Eyewitness? A confession? I didn't. Not yet. So he handed me his card and said to keep him posted. That was it. Next, I tried going through the front door. Again, I went to the next HOA board meeting, which was held in their little community clubhouse. Walked in, jeans still damp from the lake, and got a half-dozen side-eyes the second I stepped through the door. Most of the people there were older, buttoned-up types, sipping bottled water like they were at a charity auction. Remington was at the head of the room, standing by a whiteboard, flipping through some glossy packet like he was presenting a TED Talk on artificial turf. When he saw me, he gave that same toothpaste commercial smile he'd worn the first time we met. Didn't flinch, didn't blink. I waited for the open comment portion and raised my hand. The room got quiet. I kept it simple, no shouting, no accusing. Just told them who I was, what was happening, and that I didn't want to escalate anything, but someone had damaged my property, and if the HOA had concerns, they could come talk to me directly. I offered to discuss reasonable terms, use of the shoreline, boat access, whatever. I said I'd even be open to a small maintenance fee if it was backed by something real. Not this made-up nonsense they'd been printing off in Remington's office. You could have heard a pin drop. Then some woman in a cardigan leaned forward and said, "But you don't live in the community. Why should you get the benefits without paying dues?" Another guy added, "You're basically trespassing." Remington didn't say a word. He just let it hang. I asked if anyone had read the county records, that my island isn't part of Wren Shores, that the lake is registered as a public waterway, and the shoreline near the launch wasn't private property, just leased for maintenance. I offered to show the documents. Remington finally spoke, cool, casual, too calm. "We've updated our bylaws to reflect the current environmental concerns around increased boat traffic. If you'd like to make a formal appeal, you'll need to submit it in writing and wait for a response at the next quarterly meeting." I laughed. I couldn't help it. Quarterly? That was 3 months away. You want me to submit an appeal to take a boat home? I told him no thanks, that I wasn't playing along with something that was made up to push me off the map, that I'd go through the county if I had to. And he said, still smiling, "You're welcome to pursue that route. Just be aware, during the review period, we reserve the right to restrict shoreline access for non-compliant vessels." The room didn't gasp or anything. They just nodded, like it was normal, like it was a rule they all understood, and I was the idiot who didn't get the memo. I left before I said something I'd regret. That night, I called Ellie, my cousin on my mom's side. She's a real estate lawyer in Raleigh, smart as hell, and not afraid to bite when it counts. I laid it all out for her, every last detail, and she went dead quiet for a few seconds when I mentioned the access fee. Then she said, "That's illegal, or very close to it. Let me look into some things." She dug into the property lines, the HOA bylaws, the state's rules on navigable waterways, and every time she called me back, she sounded more and more baffled that this had gone as far as it had. But the problem? Even if they were bluffing, even if I was in the right, they were winning. Because every day that passed, I had to launch that boat not knowing what I'd find. Would it still start? Would my tires be slashed? Would I get another letter, another ticket? Would Lily be with me when something went wrong again? I tried talking to the neighbors, the ones I'd seen 100 times on the dock, walking dogs or carrying groceries. Most just gave me polite shrugs and muttered, "Sorry, I can't get involved." A few looked genuinely guilty, like they knew what was happening, but they were afraid of crossing Remington. Only one guy, Ben, this Vietnam vet who lived in the yellow house near the East Bend, actually talked to me. Said he thought the whole thing was bullshit on stilts. But then he looked over his shoulder and muttered, "They'll come for me next if I make noise." I couldn't even blame him. By that point, I'd reached a weird kind of numbness. I wasn't surprised anymore, just tired. I'd jump when my phone buzzed, flinch every time I saw a car idling too long near the dock. I didn't tell Lily everything, but she wasn't dumb. She could feel the tension, see the way I checked the motor twice before starting it, or how I scanned the lot before locking the truck. It felt like being hunted, not violently, not openly, just constantly. Every option I tried ended in a dead end, a shrugged shoulder, or a politely worded version of "get lost." And for the first time since I'd bought that island, since I'd built a life I was actually proud of, I thought about walking away, selling the place, leaving the boat to rot, letting them win. Because honestly, it was starting to feel like they already had. I don't even remember why I went into the store that day. Probably to grab propane or coffee filters, one of those little errands that distract your brain just long enough to feel normal again. Joanne was behind the counter, same as always, flipping through some binder. She didn't even look up when I came in, just waved a hand like, "Hey, island guy, you know where the stuff is." But as I was walking past the register, I caught something on the corner of the counter, a stack of old newsletters. You know the kind, printed on cheap paper, full of clip art leaves and announcements about bake sales and neighborhood block parties no one actually wants to attend. "Is that HOA stuff?" I asked, mostly out of boredom. Joanne looked up and shrugged. "Yeah, some guy dropped off a box of the old ones, said they were clearing out the clubhouse file room, told me to recycle them or burn them, whatever." I picked one up. Date was 2 years ago, right before Remington ever showed up. No reason for me to care, really. But I flipped through it anyway while waiting in line. Page 2 had a little write-up titled "HOA Renews Lake Agreement," with a grainy photo of the old board members standing next to some county official. My eyes skimmed past the fluff, then stopped. Right there, buried in a block of legalese, was a sentence that made my brain light up like a slot machine. In accordance with the 1998 Public Access Clause, HOA management of shoreline property shall not impede free use of Wren Lake by residents or non-resident property owners, provided such use does not involve construction or permanent docking. I read it again, and then it hit me like a brick to the chest. They legally couldn't block access to the lake. Not from the shoreline, not for me, not for anybody. That fee, that shoreline usage policy, the so-called restriction they were leaning on, complete fiction, a bluff, a power play. I grabbed 2 more newsletters from the stack and took them straight out to the truck. My hands were shaking. Not out of rage, not yet. Out of this weird, twitchy hope I hadn't felt in weeks. Back at the island, I dug out the paperwork from when I bought the place. It took a while. I'm not exactly a filing cabinet guy, but eventually I found the property deed. On page 3, in dull gray ink, it had the phrase I needed: "access via public waterway, no physical easement required." Which, to be honest, I'd glossed over when I bought the place. Sounded like lawyers speak back then. But now it sounded like freedom. I called Ellie. She picked up halfway through the first ring. I didn't even say hi, just read the line from the newsletter and then the one from the deed. She didn't speak for a second, then said, "Oh my God." I asked her if it was enough, and she said, "If we can verify it's still in effect." It's not just enough, it's a bullet through their whole argument. We hung up, and she dove in, called the county clerk, pulled digital archives, found the agreement between Wren Shores and the city for shoreline management. It was all there. Wren Shores didn't own the shoreline, they managed it, like gardeners, like janitors. The land still belonged to the county, and the county had included that 1998 clause to make sure people like me, people who weren't in the HOA, could use the lake without harassment. But the kicker? The newsletter I found had been signed by the previous HOA president, a guy named Leonard Dorsey, the same guy who stepped down right before Remington took over. Leonard was even quoted in the piece, saying something like, "We're proud to keep Wren Lake open to everyone who enjoys its beauty." I sat there on my deck, holding that dumb little folded newsletter, listening to frogs croaking somewhere in the trees, and all I could think was, Remington knew. There's no way he didn't. This clause wasn't buried. It was published in their own newsletter. They celebrated it. And yet every single thing they'd thrown at me, from the fake fees to the boat sabotage, was built on pretending it didn't exist. That wasn't just shady, that was malicious, calculated, and now I had proof. Not just that they were wrong, but that they were lying. Thing is, I still didn't know what to do with it yet. I wasn't a lawyer, I wasn't a fighter, I just wanted to be left the hell alone. But this was different, because now I wasn't just some guy on a boat. I was someone they tried to erase, and in doing that, they handed me the one thing I hadn't had this whole time: leverage. I looked out across the lake, at the calm black surface stretching from my dock to that little HOA shoreline I used to think of as neutral territory, and I thought, you wanted to play gatekeeper? Okay, Charles, let's talk gates. I didn't sleep much that night, not out of stress this time, but because my brain wouldn't shut the hell up. You ever get that kind of adrenaline where you're exhausted but wired at the same time? Like your body's begging for rest, but your head's in some kind of courtroom fantasy where you're absolutely dismantling your enemy in front of a packed crowd. That was me. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, running scenarios where I exposed Remington on a projector screen, pointed at him like some villain in a Netflix docuseries, and the crowd gasped in unison. I knew I had something. I just didn't know exactly how to use it yet. That clause, that newsletter, the deed, all of it added up. But I needed it organized, solid, ready to survive whatever legal gymnastics Remington would throw back. So the next day, I called Ellie again. She didn't even say hello this time, just jumped in with, I found the original lease agreement between the county and the HOA. And that's when it really got good. Because the document didn't just confirm what we already suspected. It included something even better. A renewal clause. A clause that said the HOA's management of the shoreline had to be reapproved every 10 years by the county. And the last recorded renewal on file? You guessed it. Dated just over 10 years ago. They never filed for reapproval. Which meant, legally speaking, they weren't even authorized to control that shoreline anymore. They were just squatting in a rulebook they hadn't updated since flip phones were cutting edge. Ellie let out this low whistle and said, Mark, this is bigger than just your boat. I started pacing my dock, phone wedged between my ear and shoulder, heart hammering like I'd just sprinted across the lake. So what do? I asked. She took a breath. We get strategic. You don't go yelling from the rooftops, not yet. You gather everything, every ticket, every photo, every stupid memo they sent. We file a formal complaint to the county and CC the HOA. But before we do that, we make sure it'll land hard. No warning shots. She was right. No more reacting. No more hoping reason would kick in. I needed to flip the board. So I started building my file. Took photos of the newsletter, scans of the lease agreement, the clause in my deed. I made a log of every incident, the fake inspections, the vandalism, the bogus parking tickets, the threats. I called Joanne at the store and asked if she'd be willing to make a short statement about what she saw that day with the guys around my boat. She agreed, bless her, said, that man's been poisoned since he showed up in his little smugmobile. I'll say whatever you need. Even Ben, the vet, called me after hearing whispers about some island guy stirring the pot. He didn't say much, but he offered something better than words, a USB stick. Turns out he'd kept some private recordings of board meetings. Not for drama, he just had a habit of documenting everything since the HOA once tried to fine him for planting tomatoes too close to the sidewalk. One of the recordings? It had Remington saying, laughing actually, if he wants to play hermit, he can go float on someone else's lake. Yeah, that was going to look real nice in a hearing. Ellie had a contact in the local paper, not some big glossy outlet, just a regional reporter who liked civic drama and had a soft spot for underdog stories. We agreed not to go to her just yet, but it was in our back pocket. Once the county had the complaint in hand, we'd give the reporter a nudge, let her do what reporters do best, poke. Meanwhile, I started keeping everything digital. I didn't trust printed paper anymore, had a folder on a backup drive labeled insurance. Another one labeled boom. Both password protected. Both ready. And maybe this part sounds dumb, but I cleaned the boat. Like, really cleaned it. Polished the rails, tightened the canopy frame, even patched a little dent in the bow I'd been ignoring for months. Not because I thought it mattered to the case, but because I needed to remember why I was doing this. That boat was my car, my bridge, my front porch. And that island? That island was the first place in years that had felt like mine, not just on paper, in my bones. And the more I thought about how close I'd come to giving it up, not because I was wrong, but because they wore me down, the angrier I got. Not the hot, red-faced kind of angry, the cold, focused kind, the kind that gets things done. I stopped flinching when my phone buzzed. I stopped watching the shoreline like something was going to jump out of it. I stopped thinking like a guy who had to ask for permission to get home. The plan wasn't just about paperwork or courtrooms anymore. It was about taking back the ground I never should have had to defend in the first place. I wish I could say the moment I dropped the complaint on the county's desk, fireworks went off and Justice marched in wearing a sheriff's badge. But no, it was quieter than that, slower, more surgical. It started with an email, simple subject line, received and under review, just a timestamp and a case number signed by some mid-level legal coordinator in the county land management office. But to me, it felt like an opening salvo. I forwarded it to Ellie and then took a long walk down my dock, breathing in the smell of lake water and pine like I was finally waking up from something. I'd been walking around tight-chested for so long I forgot what it felt like to just stand and not brace for impact. That feeling lasted about a day and a half. Because Remington? He didn't take long to notice something was up. I think it was when someone from the county called the HOA office to confirm their shoreline lease documents. The rumor mill must have fired up quick because I started getting cold stares again at the parking lot. One guy even accidentally parked so close to my truck I had to crawl through the passenger door just to get in. Then came the email. Yep, he emailed me directly, first time. Not through HOA letterhead, just straight up Remington, full of passive-aggressive charm. Said he was disappointed in my recent actions and concerned about the impact of escalating matters through outside agencies. His exact words were, "It would be unfortunate if a misunderstanding became unnecessarily adversarial." Unfortunate, like we were having a lover's quarrel instead of him trying to force me off my own lake route. I didn't reply, I just forwarded it to Ellie and added, "Getting warm in here, huh?" Her response was even better. Let him sweat. Timing is everything. And timing was everything. Because that same week, I got a voicemail from the county office. The voice was polite, professional, but just stiff enough to let me know this had gone up a couple rungs higher than usual. They wanted to schedule an in-person meeting. Nothing formal yet, just a conversation. Me, a rep from the county, and, surprise, someone from the HOA. I agreed, but I didn't go alone. Ellie made the drive in. We walked into that little admin building together, her in a black blazer that meant business, and me in my usual jeans and flannel, except this time the flannel was ironed. Remington was already there, of course, sitting like he owned the room, legs crossed, smiling like this was all some polite misunderstanding. He even stood up to shake my hand like we were old golf buddies. We sat, they talked, and for a while it was all surface level. The county rep asked about access, permits, usage. I answered every question clearly, calmly. Ellie chimed in when needed, quoting chapter and verse from the lake lease agreement. Then the county rep pulled out a copy of that 1998 clause. You should have seen Remington's face, not panic. He was too polished for that. But there was a twitch, a millisecond of realization that the game had changed, that the ball he thought was his had suddenly rolled into my court and burst into flames. He tried to argue, said the clause was outdated, that the HOA had restructured its jurisdiction since then, that shoreline access needed to be reevaluated for environmental impact. Ellie pounced. Then why, she said, flipping through her binder, did your own HOA newsletter celebrate this clause as recently as 2 years ago? She slapped down the printed page, the one with his predecessor's signature, the one we got from Joanne's dusty stack. Then she leaned back, smiled, and said, "We have copies. In triplicate." The county rep didn't smile, didn't nod, just underlined something quietly on his notepad. Meeting ended shortly after that. I didn't hear from Remington directly again, not through email, not in person, but he was busy behind the scenes. Because the next week, I got a visit from the Lake Safety Committee. 2 guys in polo shirts, clipboards, and sunglasses so big they looked like they were auditioning for a cop drama, claimed they were doing random checks for boating compliance. I asked if they were affiliated with the state. They said no. Asked if they were with the county. Still no. Just a community initiative, they said. I laughed and told them to take their community initiative and paddle it somewhere else. That night, someone loosened the rope on my dock line. Nothing broke, thankfully. I tie my knots like I mean it, but it was a warning. A dumb, petty one. Like they were trying to remind me they could still reach me, even across the water. Didn't matter. They were slipping. Because while they were sneaking around loosening ropes, I was preparing the last punch. Ellie filed an official cease and desist against the HOA's fake fee enforcement. We attached every incident report, every letter, the gas tampering report from the boat mechanic I finally brought out, even a witness statement from Ben, who, bless him, finally stood up and said, "Enough is enough." And then we went to the press. That local reporter? She was hungry, ate it up like it was hot barbecue in July. Story ran with the headline, "Lake Life or Power Trip. HOA accused of overreach on Wren Shores." Within 2 days, my inbox exploded. Locals started messaging me. People from other neighborhoods, fishermen, kayakers, even a retired judge who read the article and offered to write a statement if it came to that. The pressure was on. Remington stopped showing up to meetings. A few board members quietly resigned. And for the first time in a long time, I could breathe. But I wasn't done. Because a win in the papers isn't the same as a win on paper. And I wanted both. It started with whispers. Nothing dramatic, no grand confrontations, just this slow, quiet unraveling. You could feel it when you walked through the Wren Shores parking lot. People stopped pretending not to see me. The usual awkward glances turned into nods. The ones who used to clutch their HOA handbooks like Bibles suddenly had questions in their eyes. Doubts. The article had landed harder than I thought it would. What I didn't know was that the reporter, Lacey, had kept digging. On her own. She filed a public records request and got access to HOA budgets, meeting notes, internal communications. Stuff that wasn't illegal to have, but definitely wasn't meant for public eyes. Turns out, the shoreline access fee wasn't the only thing Remington had been inventing. He'd also funneled HOA funds into side contracts with companies run by his buddies. Landscaping, dock maintenance, even the company that printed those stupid violation notices, they were all tied back to him. All marked up, all billed directly to residents. So Lacey ran another piece. This time, the headline was bolder, nastier. Lake Community HOA accused of financial misconduct, retaliation against island resident. The subheading? They cut my boat line, then they sent me a bill. She included the whole story, everything. The fake fees, the sabotage, the documents Ellie found, the recordings from Ben, the quote from Remington laughing about floating off someone else's lake. My photo was in the article too, which I wasn't thrilled about, but it helped. Showed people I wasn't some faceless grumbler. I was a guy, with a daughter, with a home. It went local viral, which is its own weird kind of fame. I started getting stopped at gas stations. One guy at the boat supply shop gave me a discount for fighting the HOA goblins. Even Joanne made a big sign that said, "Island parking, free to those who mind their own damn business." But the real hit came when the county called a public meeting. Not just some behind-the-curtain hearing, an actual open session at the Civic Center where anyone with a grievance could show up and speak. And boy, did they. Ellie and I got there early. She wore the same blazer, I wore the same flannel, my now official uniform for standing up to nonsense. The room filled up fast. Not just Wren Shores residents, people from around the lake, people who'd been burned by other HOAs, folks with folders, photos, receipts, and they weren't quiet. One guy stood up and said, "I paid over $2,000 in fines last year for non-compliant solar panel angles. I didn't even know that was a thing." A woman followed with, "They tried to charge my husband for excessive gravel. That's not even a real phrase." When it was my turn, I didn't have to say much. The story was already out there. I just held up the original lease agreement and the old HOA newsletter and said, they knew. They did it anyway. Silence, the kind that lands heavy. Then the county rep leaned into the mic and said they were suspending the HOA's shoreline lease pending full investigation. Remington wasn't in the room. He didn't show. But 3 board members did, and they looked like they'd just been told their credit cards got declined on national TV. A week later, the HOA held an emergency election. 2 more members resigned. Remington officially stepped down for personal reasons. Nobody bought it, and then came the cherry on top. The county ordered an independent audit of the HOA's financial records going back 5 years. No one said the word fraud, but the way everyone flinched when it was mentioned told you exactly what they were thinking. Within a month, the fee system was suspended entirely. They took down the private use only signs at the dock. Removed the fake permits from the bulletin board. Even the stupid little rope gate they'd installed along the launch path was just gone one morning, like it had never been there. Ben came out of his house and helped me carry a new gas can down to the boat. We didn't talk much. He just clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hell of a storm you rode through." I nodded, still standing. The funny part? I never wanted to be that guy, the one who made noise, the one who files complaints and speaks at meetings and gets quoted in the paper. But when I saw that stretch of shoreline open again, unlocked, unguarded, no fake fees or silent threats. I felt something shift. Not pride, not revenge, just peace. The kind I hadn't felt since all this started. I took the boat out that night, just me and the sound of water hitting the hull. The motor purred. The air was cool. Halfway across, I stopped, let it drift, and looked back at the shoreline lights blinking in the distance. They'd tried to block me, tried to scare me, tried to run me off water I had every right to travel. And now? Now they were the ones retreating. These days, things are quiet again. The kind of quiet I moved out here for in the first place, not the anxious, waiting for the next hit kind, but the kind that wraps around you like an old blanket. Peaceful, earned quiet. I still take the boat across the lake every day, same path, same launch, same slow rhythm of water under the hull. Only now, there's no tension in my shoulders, no scanning the shoreline for shadows, no reaching for oars like I might need to outrun something invisible. The dock looks the same. So does the island. Trees still creak the way they always have. Birds still show up like they own the place. The frogs never cared about HOA policies, and they're just as loud and smug as ever. But me, I'm different. Lily was out here last weekend. She ran barefoot through the brush and jumped off the dock like none of it ever happened, and I realized that's the goal, right there. Not just to win, but to make it so the people you're fighting for never even have to think about the war. She still calls it Castle Dad. That little sign's faded now, the wood warped and the paint flaked, but I haven't replaced it. Feels right that way, like it's aged with us. I still see a few of the HOA folks when I'm back on the mainland. Most won't meet my eyes. Some do, though. A couple even nod now. One guy, Steve, I think, actually thanked me. Said, I didn't like what they were doing, but I didn't know how to stop it. You did. That felt strange. Good, but strange. Like being the designated adult in a room full of rule followers who forgot why the rules mattered in the first place. Joanne keeps a clipping of the article pinned behind the counter now. It's yellowing at the edges. Every once in a while, someone asks if that island guy is still around, and she just jerks a thumb toward the lake. He's always around, she says. Ellie says the audit's still dragging on. There's talk of restructuring the HOA completely, maybe even dissolving it. I don't care, honestly. That part of the fight's not mine anymore. I got what I came for. I got my home back. The funny thing is, I used to think being left alone was the whole point. That peace meant isolation. But now, after all this, I think peace is knowing you don't have to fight anymore. But if it ever comes to that again, you know damn well how to fight. I keep a copy of that newsletter tucked inside the boat's storage box, laminated now, waterproofed. Next to it is the gas cap, the one they left hanging when they tried to break my ride home. I keep it as a reminder, not out of bitterness, just to remember what quiet costs and why it's worth protecting. There's a stretch of water halfway between the dock and the island, right where the engine sputtered out that day with Lily on board. I still slow down there sometimes, not because I have to, just because I want to. Sometimes the lake's like glass, and you can see the sky in it so clearly it makes you dizzy. That's when I cut the motor, let the silence settle in, and think, yeah, this is mine. Not because someone gave me permission, but because I never stopped showing up.